Finance Committee workshop. Thank you for bearing with us as we sort out our technical difficulties. We've had a few, but anyway, thank you for being here. As usual, I'll start with the notice. Automatic notice, New Haven. The Finance Committee will hold a workshop on Thursday, April 15th, 2021 at a little past 6. The time correctly at 6:15 today, p.m. via teleconference to review portions of the annual city budget proposed for fiscal year commencing July 1, 2021. Meeting can be viewed at https://bit.ly/3CQOAFH or by phone at 312-715-8592 or 312-626-6799. Meeting webinar ID 940-4400-6058. Phone voice passcode 82689-16985. Item number 1. The following special service districts will be heard. A, Grand Avenue Special Service District. B, Chapel West Special Service District. C, Town Green Special Service District. And D, Whaley Avenue Special Service District. Number 2, the following city department will be heard. A, Board of Education. These items are filed with the city clerk and may be inspected at room 202, 200 Orange Street, New Haven. For order, Honorable Yvette Hamilton, Chair. Attest, Honorable Michael Smart, City Clerk. If you need a disability-related accommodation, please call 3 business days in advance, 203-946-8122 voice or 203-946-8582 TTY. Public may join the meeting and may submit public testimony at publictestimony@newhavencity.gov. Meeting can be viewed via teleconference at https://bit.ly/3CQ0OAHFH or by phone at 301-715-8592 or 312-626-6799. Meeting webinar ID 940-4400-6058. Phone/voice passcode 826-8916-985. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us this evening. I will start with the attendance of the committee. Adam Marchand?
Here.
Ernie Santiago?
Here.
Salvatore Nicola?
Here.
Jeanette Morrison?
Here.
Taisha Walker-Myers?
Here.
Anna Festa?
Here.
Richard Furlow?
Here.
Evelyn Rodriguez?
Here.
Ron Hurt?
Madam Chair, Alder Hurt appears to be here, although he's frozen for the moment.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Marshall.
I think he'll be rejoining us shortly.
Thank you. And Alder Charles Decker. All right. I would like to acknowledge also the other colleagues that have joined us this evening. Alders Frank Douglas, Alder Abby Roth, Alder Honda Smith, Alder Eli Sabin, Alder Cooper, Alder Jody Ortiz, and Alder Rosa Santana. I don't know if I've missed anyone. If I have, please let me know now. If not, I will move on to our Vice Chair, Mr. Adam Marchand, to give us our procedures as usual, and then we'll go right into the meeting. Alder Marchand, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to remind colleagues, city staff, and members of the public that tonight is a workshop. That means that we'll be hearing from leaders from the special service districts and from staff from the Board of Education, and members of the committee will ask questions. There's no public hearing tonight. Members of the public who wish to comment on the proposed budget may do so at any time by emailing publictestimony@newhavenct.gov. Those comments will be received and reviewed all the way up until our special meeting on the budget on the 26th of May. If members of the public wish to testify in a Zoom setting such as this, our final public hearing on the proposed budget will be on Monday, May 10th at 6 p.m. And the formal notice will be issued about a week ahead of that with the connection information. So no public hearing tonight, just colleagues on the committee discussing issues and questions with the presenters. There's basically two groups, the special services districts, all four of them will go one after the other, and then we'll pause and afford colleagues opportunities to ask questions of the presenters. And then we'll transition over to the Board of Education for the second opportunity for colleagues to ask questions. As we have done in the past, Madam Chair will go through the roster of committee members as is published online to ask people, members of the committee, if they would like to ask questions. We're asking colleagues to keep it to 4 questions. And upon the discretion of the chair, depending on how we're doing with time, there may be additional opportunities. So that is our format for this evening. This is our final departmental budget workshop in this cycle, hearing from the special services districts first, and then Board of Education. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Marchand. And with that, we will start with the first special service district on our list this evening, the Grand Avenue Special Service District.
Madam Chair, I
Yes.
don't see him listed on the attendees.
He is not listed on the attendee. He's on my agenda, Grand Avenue Special Services District.
He's been notified. I don't know why he's not here.
Carlos is going to speak for them.
Hi, everybody. Hold
Are
on
you
one
gonna-
moment.
You doing it for him?
Frank Alvarado has had a commitment tonight. He's unable to attend. We have some other committees. As you guys may be aware, this is a fully volunteer organization. So he's just one of the commissioners who also acts in the capacity as executive director, since we are a volunteer. We do have 2 other board members from the Special Services District, or at least 2 or 3, 2 and 1 consultant from the Avenue. Paul Wessel, who's a commissioner, if you could be promoted to a panelist, and Ms. Irma Reyes as well, if she could be promoted, and Ms. Giovanna Maldonado, if she's also on the call. Madam Chair.
We only need one person to speak, sir, for the district. And who are we designating for that one person?
It could be either I or Paul Wessel. The city, we are ex officio members, the city of New Haven.
All right. Since you're speaking, name and address for the record. Please.
Carlos Ezeguirre, 244 McKinley Ave, New Haven, Connecticut, 06515.
Go right ahead. And if the other members of the district have something to say, they will need to identify themselves, name and address as well, okay?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. I think you guys have seen the budget that we've submitted to you. The Grand Avenue Special Service District, as I mentioned previously, is an all volunteer organization at this point. The primary expenses goes to cleaning the street, which they do, I believe, 5 days a week. They do planters every year. They do some snow removal. And we are not based on the economic conditions on the avenue, we're not asking to raise the mill rate this year. And we're generally going with a similar budget to what we did last year.
Okay. Does any of your colleagues have anything to say?
This is
Sir?
Paul Wessel, 142 Nickel Street, New Haven.
Yes, sir.
Carlos did an awesome job. Thank you.
All righty. Okay, so we are just going, because there are 4 special services district, we will be taking the other 3. So please feel free to stay on the call, because at the end of all the presentations, then colleagues will, the committee will have the opportunity to ask questions of all the special services district. Okay, sir? Gentlemen?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving right along to the Chapel West Special Service District at this time.
Madam Chair, this is Vice
sir.
Chair Marchand.
Yes, sir?
I would like to note for the record that we did receive from our staff today the documents that give the budgets for each of these organizations. I have them up on my machine, so if colleagues would like to see them at some point, we can share them.
Excellent.
But I can attest to the fact that the Grand Avenue Special Services District budget is unchanged in most respects.
Status quo. Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Marchand. Who will be speaking for the Chapel West Special Service District, please?
Hi, my name is Michael Romay, 106 Morgan Avenue in East Haven, Connecticut. I have prepared the Chapel West Special Service District budget, which I submitted, and you'll have to excuse me. This is my first presentation before the distinguished committee here. For the most part, the budget that I've been submitting is pretty much the same as last year. We're not looking for any increase in our mill rate. Our revenues are forecasting to be pretty much the same, maybe a little less in contributions. Our overall expenses, pretty much also the same as last year, maybe a little less. We've done some restructuring of the organization itself as far as responsibilities. There was a president who was actually my father for many, many years. Excuse me. He was president for many, many years, and he has retired and stepped down as board president. I am the newly elected secretary treasurer of the board. I was elected last month at our meeting, our annual meeting. And I've, over the years, going back to, maybe 1990, I've been doing the accounting work for Chapel West. So I'm very familiar with a lot of their numbers. So I've presented the budget, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions that any of you may have.
Thank you, sir. Would you, Mr. Romay, thank you very much. Would you mind just bearing with us as we go through the other 2 districts, sir?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Moving right along to the Town Green.
Evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Wynn Davis, the Executive Director of the Town Green Special Services District. Our offices are at 900 Chapel Street, 6th floor, and I live at 39 Beardsley Parkway in Trumbull. So the budget I have submitted to you guys shows a 5% reduction in revenue for what we're forecasting for the coming year. We have trimmed our expenses just slightly to accommodate that. We are still looking to have a very robust year, though. So the district has pushed through this year, and we have continued our service, and we plan to do so for the next year. I think our revenues will probably rebound a bit more when we're able to do larger scale events again. I think we're all looking forward to getting back there. But that was a non-assessment revenue source for the district. So we are not looking to change the mill rate. That we want to stay the same at 1.99. And I would request that the city renew its Class D membership in the district.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. As was stated earlier, I don't know if you was on, we are taking all the districts and we'll ask questions from the respective district. Okay, thank you, sir. And moving along to the Whaley Avenue Special Service District.
Okay, there we go. Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh,
Who
okay.
are we speaking to, please?
Hi, this is Alan McCullum from the Whaley Avenue Special Service District. Good evening, esteemed elders.
Okay. Mr. McCollum, are you able to be on video or no?
It doesn't appear so. I'm trying to, but let me see. Let me see if I can start something here. Can you see me now?
Oh, yes, we can. Good evening, sir.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. As I said, good evening.
Mhm.
I'm Alan McCullum from the Whaley Avenue Special Service District. I live at 2250 Shepherd Avenue in Hamden, Connecticut. I presented our budget for the 2021-22 fiscal years for the district. Our budget, essentially, we would like to remain unchanged with our current mill rate of 2.167. We anticipate some new developments, hopefully, coming to the district, and some other buildings. One of the properties were sold on the Whaley Winthrop, that lot on the corner. We're anticipating some development in that at some particular point. There's been talk of additional development throughout the district. We'll see that when it happens, but when that does happen, that additional revenue would be generated to the city as well as to our district. So we're kind of excited about seeing that possibility. But as currently, we would like to the board to accept our proposal to have it unchanged at its current mill rate.
Thank you, Mr. McCollum.
Thank you so much, madam.
Okay, we've heard from all four of our special services district, and with that, I will start the questioning with Alder Marchand. Do you have questions for any of the special service district?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question goes to Mr. McCollum, who just gave his presentation. Thank you, all of you, for your documents and for your concise presentations. We appreciate it. I note that we're primarily being asked to approve status quo mill rate assessments on that have been approved by the boards of all these organizations. The question I have for Mr. McCollum is has he noticed any interest in development in the portion of Whaley Avenue that was recently rezoned? That's a change that we made not too long ago, and we're very interested to see if that bears fruit.
Good evening, Vice Chair Adams. Yes, we did see a lot of interest in it, and in these particular areas of rezoned. We looked at again, the lot is one of those areas that was just recently resold. The community wants to talk to the new owners to kind of weigh in as to what they want. They're looking at a mixed use project in that particular lot. A few other people, as in conversation, we're talking about taking some of the properties that they owned and trying to expand upon that. Of course, we all know that's a process, but that is something that they're looking to try to do.
Thank you for that response, sir. My next question is for our friends in the downtown special service district. That would be Mr. Davis, I guess. Could you say a little bit more about the decision to discontinue the info office at the corner of Chapel and College that has now been taken over by Claire's Cornucopia?
Well, I think first and foremost, I'm excited that Claire's has the corner now. The info center at its peak was about the year 2006, and we served about 47,000 people out of that little space. When we went into pandemic, we served about 12,000 people that year. The visitor numbers were taking a deep dive. And a lot of that has to do, in my opinion, with the rise of the smartphone. You know, we have TripAdvisor, we have Google Maps, you know, so we have recommendations and ways to get there in our pockets. So the Info Center had for years been sort of looking for ways to continue operating. And during pandemic, Claire's wanted to expand. And so we had a year-to-year lease with Yale. And we thought it was a good idea to suspend our info operations at that point, and continue working digitally on info2haven.com and sort of online.
Great. Thank you. I saw that it has an appreciable effect on your budget not to be renting that space and operating out of that space anymore. So I can imagine that was part of the equation as well. My next question is for our friends in the Chapel West. This would be for you, Mr. Romay. Of course, we all regretted the passing of Brian McGrath, such a larger than life figure and a leader for quite a few years in your special services district. It looked from the budget that you didn't necessarily hire a replacement, but kind of spread his duties across a committee of different people. Is that a correct interpretation of the budget that I saw?
That is correct. And not only the duties of Brian, but also my father who was serving as not only president of the board, but sort of as the administrator for all the operations that happened in Chapel West. In the past, we had one of our subcontractors slash managers, Anthony Giano, who many of you know. We kind of gave him, or the board gave him, a title as operations manager, and with that, along with that, came an increase in pay. And as far as office stuff and, you know, keeping the office going, which again was a strong point in my father, I have been doing that in my father's absence for the last couple of months, and I will continue to be doing that. And between the increase in Anthony's monthly pay and mine, you'll see that, and in the budget, my pay will fall into the consultant area. That's why you'll see a larger increase in consulting. I'm not on a regular payroll. I do it as a subcontractor, and the increase in Anthony's pay is in our maintenance item for our budget in there. Overall, it was going to be a savings of about $35,000 to $40,000 a year between eliminating the two people on the payroll.
Okay. Sounds like you're managing to get through it despite the passing of these people.
Yeah, you know, the past year was a difficult year for all, you know, for everyone with the pandemic. And, you know, things kind of came down a level, so to speak, as far as being able to get out in the district and perform some of our duties. And, you know, over time, especially like late summer into the early fall, I had been helping out more and more with Chapel West, or more for my father. I'm not sure how many of you know my father. He was one of the founders, along with Evelyn Schatz, in 1986 of Chapel West. And he had been, he actually took over as president when Evelyn passed. Again, through this whole time, I had always been doing the accounting work for them. And my father's been having some health issues with his eyes, and found that he was not able, and as he was going on, he really wanted to finish out his term as president. So for many months, I've been stepping in and helping out. So as all of that has happened, and then between myself and Anthony, we've been making some changes and kind of streamlining our operation at Chapel West. But nonetheless, we've still gone ahead with some, actually one big major capital improvements. And we started replacing all the globes in the light posts, in the street. And that's, well, you don't see this past year's budget, but we're in the process of spending $60,000, which should take care of maybe 70 to 80% of the street post. And the line item where you see capital improvements, the 30,000 will be to finish the light post. But in addition to that, we've also started a couple of weeks ago, when the weather has been breaking, we've been upgrading the trash receptacles, painting them, putting new decals on them. The parking meters, we've been spray painting and getting them sharper. And we already did our first planning for the spring with our pansies and our planters going down the street, and it all looks pretty good.
Well, I want to thank you for being here tonight and for your dedication and for being part of transition. Thank you so much. My last question, Madam Chair, is for our friends in the Grand Avenue Special Services District. And I'm not remembering exactly the physical extent of the district and whether or not it overlaps with the recent proposal to rezone a portion of the Grand Avenue corridor as a commercial gateway district. So maybe it doesn't, but I'm wondering if that's an issue that your special services district has any interest in and is part of the discussion of or not.
This is Paul Wessel. I can answer that. The Grand Avenue rezoning that was proposed was for the part of Grand Avenue and Worcester Square, and did not address Grand Avenue in Fairhaven.
Okay, so then your association hasn't had any participation in that discussion.
We have not.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everybody.
All righty, moving right along to Alder Ernest Santiago.
No question at this time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
All righty. Alder DeCola, any questions for the Special Services District?
No questions at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Alder Morrison?
No questions at this time, Madam Chair.
Alder Walker Myers?
No questions at this time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Righty. Alder Festa, any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I just have a couple regarding downtown and why the expenses were higher than the revenue. And the second question is, you mentioned a renewal of Class D. Could you just explain what that is? Thank you.
Sure. So the Town Green District has an operating reserve, which allows us to, for the last 2 years, we have been proposing and working through deficit budgets to spend down some funds that we had in the bank. And this year, we had a deficit budget. It was the largest ever. It was $122,000 deficit. We're going to come in under budget, but we felt strongly as an organization that we needed to continue to support the district at the same level in this coming year. So we do have a deficit budget for the coming year. So that is something that we've discussed at the board level. and something that they're very conscious of. But we felt it was the right thing to do, and we have the resources to do that right now. I'm sorry, the second part of your question, Alder Festa?
Was regarding the Class D certification.
Oh,
No, that's
right, I
okay. Thank you.
apologize. Yes, so the city has maintained a Class D membership in the district with a contribution of $140,000 per year. And what that does is it gives the city an ex officio seat with a vote on our board. And that seat is currently filled by Mike Piscatelli.
Okay, thank you for that. I wasn't sure what that was. Thank you, everyone, for all the work you do to beautify our beautiful New Haven. No further questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Festa. Alder Furlow, any questions for the special service districts?
I believe I'm all set, Madam Chair. All my questions have been answered. Thank you.
All righty. Alder Evelyn Rodriguez?
None at this time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Alder Hurt?
Madam Chair, I have no questions at this time. I do apologize for the technical difficulties I've been having.
No problem. We understand. Is Alder Decker with us?
Madam Chair, I believe that Alder Decker will join us around 7 this evening.
Righty, thank you. All right, is there anyone else from the committee that have an additional question for any of the special service districts at this time? Anyone else for the second time of the committee? All righty. Thank you, special service district representatives, for all your hard work in our communities. We appreciate the work and the beautification of the community. Have a blessed night and thank you. You are free to stay on. We're gonna move on to the next item on the agenda this evening. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All righty. And with that, thank you, everyone. Now we'll move on to item 2 on the agenda, which we'll hear from the Department of the Board of Education, please.
Madam Chair, I may take just a moment to demote some panelists and promote others. So
No problem.
we'll give it just a moment.
Yes, indeed. Bear with us, everyone.
There's Mr. Penn.
Uh-huh.
I assume he will not be the only representative from the Board of Ed. Nope, there's another.
Dr. Tracy should be here, and Ms. Keisha Hannon should also be here.
Yeah, we see Miss Hannon.
Oh, there she is.
Hannes.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello, good evening.
Let's give it a moment for Dr. Tracy.
Yes.
There she
by
is.
all means.
There I am. Let me make it a little more pronounced. Thank you. So are you ready for us? Yes.
Most definitely. Good evening, everyone from the Board of Education. Thank you for joining us this evening along with Mr. Gormany. All I will ask is for everyone speaking to just give us your names and addresses for the record, please, and you may proceed. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening, Madam Chair and honorable and distinguished alders. Thank you for having us on the Board of Education this evening. My name is Eileen Tracy, 226 Fountain Street, New Haven, Connecticut. And I'll present Mr. Penn. Mr. Penn, please give your information.
Good evening, everyone. Philip Penn, Chief Financial Officer for the district, 2 Hollyberry Lane, Burlington, Connecticut.
Then Ms. Hannons.
Good evening, everyone. It's always an honor to come before you. Keisha Red Hannons, Assistant Superintendent, 155 Hearn Lane, Hampton, Connecticut.
Okay, when I was growing up, I grew up in the islands, and there was a saying, water, water everywhere, and not a drop to drink. I'm going to transfer that to money, money everywhere, and not much for general funds. So I just wanted to put that in there. So we have a budget presentation for you this evening. I know last year we came in front of this distinguished group and we presented our budget, and there were concerns that we did not do much cutting. Now, this year, we've been hit badly by the pandemic, which changed a whole lot of things, a whole lot of way in how we educate our students, and pushing us into being more innovative as we think about and plan how we service our students and families, both remotely and now currently in person. As you see our table of contents, we are starting out with some background information. We're going to identify some key trends. We're going to look at the 2021-22 proposed budget, how each school is funded. We're going to look at how we're using the COVID grants so the Alders get a chance to see how we are using those funds to support our schools, facilities, summer activities, and then we'll have a summary and then we will take questions. Mr. Penn will talk to us about how we're looking at our strategic plan. As you know, the Board of Ed passed our strategic plan. Finally, we were able to complete one. And in our strategic plan, there's a priority area that's called 5.1, which is equitable resourcing. And we want to look at that based on the support. We want to support the instructional core we refer to, which the student, the staff, and the content, which is what we refer to as the instructional core, and predicate that on a balanced budget. We want to allocate resources in a manner that promotes equity between our magnet schools and our neighborhood schools, and a budget that reflects the true cost of running the New Haven public schools. We know also that the city of New Haven is struggling financially also, and also getting a windfall of funds that cannot be used on the general fund side. We are looking at certain steps to close the 2021 deficit, notably teachers foregoing their raise. Last year, we were happy to have the union step in and freeze the teacher's salary, which yielded us $4.5 million. If that had not been so, we would have been faced with a deficit at the end of this school year. But we're grateful to the teachers union. I'm now going to turn over to Mr. Penn to lead you through the presentation.
Madam Chair, would it be okay if I share my screen?
Oh, go right ahead, sir.
Very good.
Mr. Lucas and our team at the back end will help you with that.
Okay. All right. If I may, let me just take you through the presentation, and hopefully this was emailed to you earlier today, so you had an opportunity
Yes.
to look at it. I know it's a lot of slides. I promise to move quickly through it. I'm not going to take 2 minutes a slide, I promise. But it's good being with you all tonight, what I think might be the last time. I'm not sure 100% yet. We might be back for something a little later, but I'm glad to have the opportunity to present to you tonight about what our budget looks like for 21-22. As Doc mentioned, we're going to take you through sort of the proposed budget, but a couple of other topical issues that we think might be front and center in terms of discussion points for tonight. And as Dr. Tracy said, you know, we're looking at this from the point of view of almost three different lenses. One in that we're looking for our strategic plan, and that we really want to try and look at things from an equity standpoint. Two, that we recognize the city of New Haven is also struggling, and we know what the projected deficit was in the paper a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, that certain steps that we took to close the 2020-2021 deficit, teachers foregoing their raises, that can't repeat in 21-22. So it's kind of with those three lenses that we took a look at this year. Just by way of background, as you all know, we're a very diverse district. And I would call your attention to what's in the top left-hand corner. Almost 18% now of our learners are English learners, and almost 17% of our students receive special education services of at least some type. And both of those numbers are up over last year, and that's been a rising trend for several years now for those. So the needs are increasing as we go forward. I put this together for our Board of Education so they have a sense, and I'll repeat it here too. We spent a total of $360 million to run the schools last year for 19-20. About $200 million of that came from state grants. The biggest piece of that is ECS and Alliance. We had federal grants to the tune of just under $50 million, or about 14%. And local taxes supported the rest at about $108 million. And that includes both what's in our budget that we receive from the city and what's provided to us in-kind spending. And good examples of in-kind spending would be things that are in the city budget, like benefits, payroll taxes, things of that nature that aren't reflected in ours, debt service and things of that nature. And a very tiny little sliver up at the top, that 0.8 million was what we received for private grants last year. And as you know, we hired a new grant writer in August of last year of 2020, and she's really been doing a tremendous job for us in terms of identifying new funding opportunities going forward. It's been a terrific hire for us in terms of the amount of funds that she's developed. And I have a feeling we're going to continue to see that tiny little sliver grow bigger over the years as she gets more engaged around identifying those opportunities for us. How do our expenditures for last year compare to where we call the big three in the state median? So we're right around what the state median is at about $18,000 per student. But you'll see that there's a pretty big differential between what Hartford spends at about $20,000 per student and Bridgeport spends at only about $15,000 per student. So even among the big three, fairly similarly situated urban districts, there's a huge variance in terms of what's spent per student. Some of that is just the funds that are available for those cities. Some of those are local choice. But you know, it was interesting to me that we were within $100 of what the statewide median is. Let's take a look at enrollment, and this is going to become important for a few reasons. If you look over the last 4 years, our enrollments declined by about 2,000 students over those 4 years. Now, some of that is certainly the pandemic in the last year. But if you look, the trend was really there for the 3 years prior to that as well. So we were hearing, at least anecdotally, some shift in demographics, but also rise in alternative schools. People have charter schools that they can go to. They have alternative programs. They have private schools. They have parochial schools. There's a lot of different arrays of choices that parents have now going forward. And to some extent, we're seeing that more students are staying in their home districts. They'll come here for pre-K and then return to their home districts for kindergarten and up. Now, why that becomes important, you'll see in a few slides, is that we have a majority of our grants are driven by our enrollment. And in particular, I'd point out Title I. Title I was probably a good $2.5 or $3 million higher at that peak than what we have right now. And there's a lag. So you're typically about a year or two behind in terms of what your enrollment is, determining what your Title I funding is. So it's important for us to think about these things in terms of pressure on our grants going forward. So ECS and Alliance make up the lion's share of what the state gives us. And you'll see in the bullet point at the bottom, by statute, since New Haven's an Alliance district, any change in ECS allocation has to happen through the Alliance grant. So you'll see the blue bar is essentially flat at that level. And all the growth in state funding in that particular grant has come in Alliance. Now, Alliance, as you probably know, is much more restrictive than general ECS money is. There are 4 broad areas that we're allowed to spend Alliance money in. And we've gotten good at maximizing our opportunities within those 4 areas. But we're not allowed to spend Alliance money outside of those 4 areas, which presents a challenge for us, obviously, because we have growth in expenses outside of those 4 areas. So it becomes a challenge for us to figure out how to deal with the growth in those expenses outside of those 4 as we go forward. Talk a little bit about grant funds, and you'll see the trend from 16-17 through last year. And it's a bit of a misconfiguration if you look at 19-20. 19-20 included 8.5 million of the first or ESSER 1 grant. And if you took that out, that one-time grant, the total for that year would have dropped to 81.6 million, or down about $3 million from the year prior. Long term, outside of COVID-related grants, I think the pressure from governmental funds is downward. The state struggles continue to support education. The federal government continues to struggle to support education. And it behooves us to kind of find that next frontier in terms of where the grants are in private foundations and educational foundations and things of that sort. But it concerns us in terms of looking at the long-term trend here that's not supportive of our budget going forward. All right, let's kind of jump into the heart of the matter. What our 2020-2021 budget, as you can see here, is a little over 189 million. 21-22 request that was sent to the mayor was 198 million. Difference of 8.8 or 4.65%. So that reflects what we call a status quo budget. That's no change in programming, no change in staff, no additional ads versus what we already have today in 2020-21. And that projection does include the closure of West Rock and Quinnipiac schools, and we'll talk about the impact of that in a few slides. So how does that $8.8 million break down? And you can kind of see the change in the far right-hand column here, 2020-21 versus our approved 2021, change versus 2021 budget. So what we're looking for 22. Now, some of you are going to react to, if you look at the teacher line, what looks like a $7.9 million increase or almost 10%. Let me explain. As we were putting together the budget at the end of the last fiscal year, we had been advised by our federal delegation that our Title I funding was going to go up by about $2 million. That would have given us the opportunity to shift staff out of the general fund into Title I. Unfortunately, that information proved to be incorrect. And a matter of fact, as Ms. Hannans could confirm for you, she oversees our Title I funds. Title I actually went down $400,000 from where we were before. So that left us kind of scrambling to figure out where to put all that staff that we'd anticipated putting into Title I into the general fund budget. Now, the good news is, if you can call it that, the full year expenditure that we're tracking to right now for 2021 continues to be a surplus. Our last estimate was around $800,000. We're going to be providing a new update on that in May. There's a lot of puts and takes that we'll include in that, but I do definitely expect to end of the year in our general fund with a surplus compared to what our actual approved budget was. So what's driving that 8.8 million? As you can see here, 75% of our general fund costs are in personnel, out-of-district tuition, and transportation. And in fact, if you layer on utilities on top of that, you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 80+% of the budget gets driven by those four items. Essentially, all of our staff on the full-time are collective bargaining members. And a lot of our changing costs next year is being driven by what is the contractual changes that are in place for 21-22. Teachers, as Dr. Tracy mentioned, took a full freeze for 2021, but next year they're scheduled for step movement. And if you're already on the top step, a $2,000 increase. Administrators will see step movement in a 2.25% GWI or gross wage increase. Paraprofessionals will see step movement for the first time in as long as anyone can remember at about a 2.00% GWI. All the other salary changes in the budget, if it's an unresolved collective bargaining agreement that's not been settled yet, if it's a managerial employee with their own contract, we're estimating it between 2 and 2.5. The drop in utilities that you saw in the budget slide previous was mostly due to the West Rock and Quinnipiac, those closures. But we're also starting to harvest the benefits of what we've had for the past several years on energy efficiency upgrades. Putting in LED lights, putting in newer equipment that's not as antiquated, upgrading controls, things of that nature. Of course, we have our normal price escalation that's spelled out in our long-term agreements. Transportation, building maintenance is an example. And this is kind of down in the weeds, but it's worth mentioning. Our transportation budget assumes that the managed school transportation grant, that's money that we get from the state to offset the cost of providing the inter-district transportation, goes back up to $3 million versus the current year of 1.5. So in the statute that governs that, we actually have to be moving the students. And of course, because we were closed for a period of time and we're only remote, the state said we're not giving you the first piece of the funding. So now we are in the process of submitting the grant application for the second half, which we believe will be coming a little bit over the 1.5 million. But we do expect to get back to that $3 million mark for next year, which will explain some of the change that you're seeing in the transportation line. Okay. So just pictorially, as I mentioned, you can see here, personnel drives the overwhelming majority of this budget. Instruction, including out-of-district tuition, is a big piece. Transportation is a very big piece. And by the time you get down to what really is the other, there's not a lot there. There's about $14 million out of a $200 million budget, most of which is controllable spend that we could talk about, that we allow the principals to take charge of to make sure that they're the ones that are most closely tied to the needs of their school. We did mention to the board that we had our Board of Education a number of things that we'd be looking for next year that are not in our general fund budget and in the proposal. We've broken this out for each of the last 2 years where we had something that was specifically new. Now, the good news is, as you can see, most of these things that are on here are things that we expect to be grant eligible. So to the extent that we can use ESSER funds or the extent that we can use increased Alliance District funds, we think we can capture a lot of these there, with a couple of notable exceptions. You'll see on the second line down about a $350,000 item for what we call an equity adjustment. And we'll go through with that, what that translates to. You'll also see on there, we have a little bit of money for central office development, staff development. We typically do not have funding for if one of our HR personnel, one of our finance personnel want to take professional development through a seminar or something like that. We don't have the funding for that at this point. Typically, the funding that we do get is grant funded and is targeted at certified staff, as it should be. So more to be said on this going forward. As we know how our budget's going to play out in terms of what the state allocates to us and what we finally see in terms of alliance funding. But I just wanted to call out that there are a number of things that are being proposed for next year, but it's going to be completely dependent on where our grant funding comes in. Okay. I did mention that we do have discretionary funds that we hand out to the principals to utilize as they see best fit within their building. So if you'll bear with me a little bit, I know this slide is kind of busy, but the numbers I think will make sense. If you look at that, it's the fifth column over, I think, sixth column over, 2022 site-based budget, 1.75 million. That's where we give 1.75 million that's spread among our 39 schools for the principals to decide for anything other than part-time staff, what's the best utilization of those funds within your school. And the way that we allocate that is we'll take that 1.75 million and divide it by the total number of resident students that we have across our district. And that works out to $100.56 per student. So when you look at a Barnard with 348 resident students, they're going to get 348 times the $100.56, or 34,996. In the same way, the numbers work down for the part-time staff. $500,000 set aside in the budget works out to $28.73 on a per student basis. So for Barnard, that's going to be $9,999. So between those two items, Barnard is going to have a discretionary budget of $44,995. I know most of you are familiar with the budget books that we send out. This discretionary funds is actually a big piece of what goes into that, because this is where the school principals are going to decide, where do I want to spend this money? So taking a look at this next slide, and again, and I should point out, obviously I didn't include every school on here. It would have made the slide impossible to read. This is just basically the first 20 rows or so, just to make the point of how we do this. One of the things we really started looking into is, as I mentioned, was equity. And what we've concluded so far is that equity doesn't mean equal. I think that's the biggest take-home message that we've had so far. So when you look at this, what we started thinking about, well, how do our schools actually get funded? And you look on the left-hand side, are all the different grants that we have that go into the schools. Our federal Madden grant, our school improvement grant, our Title I school improvement grant, Commissioners Network grant, regular Title I. And on the right-hand side, you then see the designation on whether or not it's a neighborhood school or a magnet school, which would then determine, of course, whether or not they receive magnet school funding too. And in the middle of that, we also broke out what the percentage of EL learners, just as an example of one of the ways we could start thinking about equity. You know, could we think about it from the terms of a concentration of EL learners within that building? Could we think about it from the concentration of special education students within that building? But it was kind of highlighting the fact that, you know, we need to think about this a little bit differently going forward. And what we concluded was the best way to probably research that was to work closely with our district equity leadership team, or DELT, to try to think about how to use our accountability data, i.e. how are the students performing, to determine how to allocate those funds. Now, this is all predicated on a good outcome of the budget process, right? I mean, if we can't swing the $350,000, or if we can't swing some smaller number, you know, we're not going to be able to move forward with it in the 21-22 budget. But this was an opportunity for us to put a stake in the ground, as it were, and say, how do we begin to measure this going forward? And how do we begin to think differently about equitable allocation of resources across all our schools? So I think you're going to be hearing more about this in future budget periods as we kind of hone the process in on what do we think is best for our schools. All right, as I mentioned, reflected in the budget request is the closure of West Rock and Quinnipiac, and that's a savings of about $1,040,000. And some of you might be asking the question, well, wait a second, how do we close two schools and we only save $1 million? Well, if you think about it, most of that comes from the 3 building administrators that are in those buildings. And I'm pleased to share with you that we know of enough retirements in the administrator ranks that nobody's going to be laid off. People are going to be moving to different roles out of those schools. And the building operating costs themselves, the heat, the electricity, the water, things of that nature. Most of the other spend that we have in those schools are going to follow the students with as they go forward into their new programs. Plus or minuses here and there, but overall, I would expect that all the teachers, the paraprofessionals, the supplies are going to follow those students to whatever the new school is going to look like. So unfortunately, closing a school doesn't always net you a huge amount of money, but that $1 million becomes a bit of an annuity going forward, right? That's going to repeat going forward. It won't take $1 million out, but it's $1 million that's no longer in your cost structure. Okay. All right. So now, unfortunately, at this point, there's a few things that we still don't know. Grant funding, Special Respected Alliance grant, is up in the air. As you know, we're at the front end of the state's biennial budget process. We may not have a clear picture on the state's funding until May. Now, one good positive that came out recently is that we've heard that the governor's proposal on freezing ECS and Alliance was not accepted by the legislature. That really would have had a major impact on New Haven. I mean, we're only 2 years into an increase in ECS and Alliance funding. That would have been terrible for New Haven and terrible for all the other urban districts that are part of the Alliance network. Prior to the tune of $9 million over the next 2 years for New Haven. So we don't know a final number yet, but I'm glad to see that the legislature did not back that portion of the proposal. All right, so now I know all of you know there's been a lot of federal money floating around with respect to the COVID grants, and we want to kind of take you through how we're spending some of these and what our plans are going forward. So ESSER 1, this was $8.5 million, and that grant has to be expended by September of 2022. So we've got about a year and a half left on this grant. We went big on technology, as you might expect. We needed to make sure our kids had devices and the ability to use those devices as we went remote. Filters and other facility upgrades, custodial supplies of PPE, and I don't think I've ever imagined I would ever buy that much PPE as a CFO of a school district. Curriculum development that was mostly tied around how to teach remotely and how to teach asynchronously and how to teach both groups at the same time. And then part-time staff around 1.3 million, and that's more of a go forward on substitutes, on bus monitors, on things of that nature. So out of the 8.5 million, we've spent somewhere around 6.5 so far. And we've got about 2 million left to be expended over the next, as I said, 18 months. And we're well on the pace to spend that. I have no doubt this will be fully spent by the time that grant is up. So Ms. Hannons has become something of our guru on this grant, what's called ESSER 2. So ESSER 2 is $37.7 million. This one expires 1 year later. So the grant has to be expended by September of 2023. There are 4 different priority areas, and I think I'll turn it over to Ms. Hannons if she doesn't mind, just to kind of highlight what's in some of these priority areas for everyone.
Good evening once again. So the ESSER 2 grant, as Mr. Penn stated, it's a grant that we're receiving from the federal government for $37.7 million. I'm just going to highlight a few items in this. I think one of note are the 87 teachers for grades 1 to 3 to address learning loss, learning recovery, and learning acceleration in our foundation years. It is so important and critical that we provide extra support to all of our students in grades 1 to 3 to assist them to ensure they're beyond grade level. As we know, many of our students, as we're looking at preliminary tests, results, they're not performing on grade level at this time. So this is an investment that we'll make and right now to help students in the immediate need with their immediate needs, and the positions will expire June 2023. On the other side of the spectrum, you might ask, what are we doing for our high school students? Well, we are expanding our high school credentialing programs as well as our college before college opportunities. So we want to ensure that our seniors are leaving certified in a particular area that of their choosing, whether it's manufacturing or something in a nursing field. And we also want to make sure we strengthen our partnerships with our local universities to ensure more students are earning college credit while in school. And I'll just highlight one more area, summertime. You've heard a lot, I'm sure, about our Summer of Fun activities. We want our students engaged in summer activities that extend just beyond the regular academic portions. We want them outside, moving, having fun, re-engage in the learning process. And so you'll hear more about our summer camps. So we can go to priority.
Could you say something about the Twilight School? Because I think that is important.
Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, you asked me. Okay, the Twilight School.
Yes.
So
yes.
Twilight School, this is really important for us to offer our high school students opportunities to earn credit outside of the regular school day. We recognize that several of our students actually took on jobs during the pandemic, during the morning hours. Their family members, their parents were laid off. And so they took on a lot of jobs during that time. So we want to provide an opportunity for students to earn high school credit in the evening, as well as those who may also need to pick up an extra credit or two because they didn't do well with remote learning. And so these Twilight schools will provide them with that opportunity. Priority two. Priority two focuses on family and community connections. One of the places that we felt strongly that we needed to invest in were care coordinators. In some of our schools, they have care coordinators through some of our local agencies, but we don't have care coordinators in New Haven Public School. And a care coordinator is someone that will work with our students, but also their families that are in need of a lot of support and services. And so our care coordinators that we hire will go to the families' homes, connect them with local agencies, and provide the wraparound services that our families and students need. And these positions will also expire June 2023. And restorative coaches, I just think it's important to note here that in New Haven Public Schools, our Board of Ed adopted a policy in our code of conduct that has a restorative lens. And so not the punitive, you're suspended, but actually restoring the harm that may have been caused within the community to keep our students engaged in learning. Priority area 3, we are investing in counselors, social workers, and psychologists. I talked about the wraparound supports that our care coordinators will give to our neediest families and students, but we also need to ensure that we have supports right in our schools as well for our students to address their needs. And so we thought it was very important. As you know, many of our families and students in particular have experienced a lot of trauma pre-pandemic, but then during the pandemic as well. And so we need to make sure we have those supports in school. Another part area that's important, and it really loomed loudly during the pandemic, is the need to ensure our staff that we are ensuring they're doing well as well. And so providing wellness opportunities for our staff is critically important for us. And so we've set aside funding to invest in them as well. We will also invest in this priority area allows us to invest in our infrastructure. And so we are really excited. One of the things that really came out loudly through our focus groups and planning committees was the need to purchase filters and PPE, but also the conversion of water fountains to water bottle filling stations to ensure the safety of everyone in the school as well. And we'll also be doing a control systems upgrade. Finally, in priority area 4, we need a data dashboard in New Haven Public Schools. Currently, we have different systems that we utilize. We need something to kind of centralize everything, talk to all of our systems so that we can get the data reports that we need, whether it's attendance or academic data, disciplinary, finance. We need a data dashboard just to push out that information so that it's at our fingertips. We are still going to invest in electronics. One of the things I'll share with you, sadly enough, was that when we looked at the schools and we're going around looking at the devices that our teachers have, we noticed several of the PCs and monitors came with the schools. So they were several years old. And so we need to bring them up to code in order to help our teachers. And just would like to say, because I didn't say in the beginning, we have engaged over 775 stakeholders in the conversation around how we would utilize our ESSER 2 funds, recognizing that it is 37.7 million, which is a lot of funds, and Phil will tell you about more. But no fear, we had over $100 million and $150 million in ideas. So we still have a lot more ideas, and we welcome any that you may have as we prepare for ESSER 3 as well. Phil, it's over to you. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Ms.
Thank you,
Adams.
Ms.
And
Adams.
she's being very modest. She really did a fantastic job of sort of steering that whole process, trying to get all those ideas from all those stakeholders and then trying to shape almost $150 million of ask down to less than 38 million. And the filing is going in on Monday. We're all very excited about it. So, but now there's the big one, right? What we call, I prefer to call ESSER 3, but we call ARP, or the American Recovery Plan. Rescue Plan. I think it's Rescue Plan. Now we know there's over $90 million coming to New Haven Public Schools as a result of this grant. And typical as what we've seen, add on another year, these grant monies need to be expended by September 30th, 2024. So we anticipate that the grant will open to us sometime in May. It'll probably close or it'll be due sometime 6 weeks after that. And then they're going to allow us to start pulling down some of that money. Now, this is very major, the second bullet. These funds can be used to cover operating expenses. That is a major, major departure from federal past practice, where you were not allowed to supplant your existing general fund budget. You can only supplement it, meaning add on to what you already had. We also became aware that the funds can also be used to cover the deficit that we currently have in the food service fund. So as you know, we continue to operate the food service program as best we could. We didn't lay anyone off. We've run up a deficit somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million. We can cover the 2 million out of ESSER 3, which was relief for Mr. Gormany, who I know is on the call tonight. Now we're going to use the same strategic plan process that we did with ESSER 2 to figure out how we're going to spend ESSER 3. But it is a significant amount of money coming our way. And we're going to be very curious in terms of how can we potentially fundamentally change education in New Haven with these funds. So that said, as I mentioned at the outset, our request initially was $8.8 million. We're proposing cutting 4.4 million off that. And that's a reflection of what we just talked about. That we have an opportunity to use some of ARP ESSER 3 and what I hope will be some alliance and some position attrition to reduce that request. Now, the question you could probably ask yourself is, well, why not hold the whole 8.8 million? Well, the very good reason for that is what I don't want to do is set up a funding cliff that happens when that grant ends, right? If those of you that were around at the time of the TIF grants, when those were around, teachers were paid out of TIF, and then TIF went away and you had to scramble to figure out how you're going to pay for the teacher salary as a result of that. I don't want to set up New Haven to fail 2 years from now when this grant expires and you're looking to cover not only the 8 million that you had in the grant, but also what would have been our normal general fund increase for that year just on inflationary pressure. There'd be no way to make up a $12 or $14 million number without significant cuts across the district. And we're trying not to set this up to fail. We're also working with the city, I should mention, on some potential consolidation of our real estate. Unfortunately, I think that's going to impact fiscal 2023 more than fiscal 2022. We are going to award finally our long-term facility study to one of the 2 finalist vendors first week of May. That facility study will take a few months to complete, but that's largely going to become our roadmap for what facilities will we need going forward. Are there potentially other closures? Is there other openings of schools we should be thinking about? What does the infrastructure of those buildings look like, and how does that fit into our overall capital plan going forward? So we are proposing to use some of those ESSER funds, though, as a mitigation to the request. All right. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about facilities upgrades. We've been using grant money pretty extensively over the past couple of months, and we'll continue to do so for the next few. And you can see the breakdown of funds in terms of what we think are going to be allocated to facilities across those grants. So the total here, I think, if I'm doing it right, is about 5.8 million, with more to come in the American Rescue Plan. For those of you that serve on the capital committee, you probably have already heard that we're trying to restructure our capital budget requests to provide more flexibility. We probably have 12 or 14 different capital funds, each of them something separate, a painting fund, a safety fund, a fence fund, things of that nature. Well, as you might guess, I can't repair a boiler with painting fund money, right? So we're talking about consolidating a number of those down and just making a facilities fund that would make it a lot easier to address needs as they arise much more quickly. And I'm very pleased to share that we have a new chief operating officer starting on May 5th. This chief operating officer actually has a lot of facilities management experience. He comes primarily out of the healthcare industry, where he helped construct a number of facilities. So he's used to running large scale construction projects. He's also used to running all of the things that we typically have in New Haven: transportation, food service, security. So I'm delighted about the fact that we've got somebody coming in here in a few weeks before my departure, as the responsibilities of the COO have been spread among a number of different people and will finally be consolidated back to this individual going forward. But I think that's a key hire for us, particularly given the focus on facilities that we've seen over the past few months. Summer of fun. You heard Ms. Hannes talk about this a little bit. I'm not the expert here to talk about the detail, but you can see that we have a lot planned. Keisha, do you mind jumping back in for a second?
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
So our summer of fun, as I mentioned earlier, we are excited about our summer offerings. Typically in a summer, during the summertime, we offer summer program in HPS at 6 sites. We are doubling those sites this year. I see one school may be left off. So we're going to have 12 sites where we'll be offering summer programming. And we're partnering with the City of New Haven Youth and Recreation Department to provide all-day programming that will extend from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And so stay tuned, you'll hear more about that. But we are definitely excited about that opportunity. And something else that we're doing this year, we're also opening up all of our high schools. So in the past, we may have only had maybe 3 open, our regular high school programming credit recovery. This summer, all of our high school principals have been given a small budget to do programming at the school. So you may, for example, see at Co-op an arts week, creative arts week, or a writing week. You may see at ESOM's a robotics week of activities. So it may span the entire summer, which we're programming from July 1 to July 30th, or it may just be a week or 2 weeks. So the principals are working those budgets out as we speak. But we are excited about our program offerings. We felt the need strongly to invest in our students right now in the summertime to get them back re-engaged in learning.
Madam Chair, if I might just interrupt for a moment, perhaps we should recognize our colleague Alder Charles Decker, who has joined us.
Okay, good evening, Alder Decker. Continue, folks.
So I won't touch on every point on here. I mean, I think the key takeaways from this slide is there's a lot going on over this upcoming summer. I'm also pleased to point out that we're going to be working very closely with our community-based organizations. There is a significant amount of the ESSER 2 money that is set aside for that, to broaden out our opportunities for students over this upcoming summer. Summer Fun will launch on July 1st. So there's going to be a lot of news coming out about that going forward in the next month or two. And it's all going to conclude with an August 15th back to school rally and a Summer Fun Fitness Week. So there is quite a bit planned for this upcoming summer, getting students back into the routine of things, as it were, and making sure their learning acceleration is well covered out of this particularly the ESSER II grant. So in summary, I'd say we recognize the opportunity to use some of those ESSER funds going forward to take the pressure off the city's general fund. But as I also mentioned, we don't want to create a massive funding cliff that comes due 2 years out when the grant ends. ARP and ESSER to some degree might be best used for one-time fixes. Fix the food program deficit, facility and tech upgrades, large-scale textbook purchases, things of that nature. There's a lot planned in the next 6 to 12 months to aid with student academic recovery, especially over the summer, as I said. We're really committed, as you probably saw, to addressing the social and emotional needs of students and families. We recognize the pandemic's been very tough on everyone. We may be sitting on an opportunity with over $90 million coming our way to really fundamentally change, what education looks like in New Haven. And we look forward to working with everybody on the board of Alders to try and make that a reality. And at that point, our formal remarks are done. Madam Chair, we'd be happy to be here for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Penn. We will begin with, first of all, can we unshare the screen, please?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
There we go.
All righty. Thank you. All right. Starting with Vice Chair Marchand, with your question, sir. You may begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would also just note for the record that Alder Jerry Antuz and Alder Steve Winter have joined us as well.
Okay, thank you.
So I want to get right to the kind of obvious issue here, which is that there's a difference between what you're proposing and what the Elliker administration is proposing.
Yes.
By at least $1.4 million, possibly as much as $4.4 million, right? So under the mayor's proposed budgets, he holds, in the so-called crisis budget, he holds spending flat at 189 million. Under the Moving Forward Together budget, he brings it up to 192 million, a little bit more than 192 million. Your presentation, which it took me looking through a few slides to understand, but slide 26 is where it is clear. You're asking for 193.6.
Correct.
Right? Because you took, you were originally saying we can't do 189.2, we need 198.
Yep.
And you said, well, we'll take that $8.8 million difference and we'll cut it in half and we'll figure out how to pay for the 4.4 somewhere else.
Correct.
But we need $4.4 million more than what we got this year. But the mayor is not proposing that.
He is not. That is correct.
So I'd like to hear from you about what difference that $1.4 million would make. And I'm wondering if Mr. Gormany has anything to say on this point.
So I think we were in a very similar position last year. At this time, the mayor needed to propose a budget for the Board of Education that he felt fit best for the overall city budget that he had to accomplish, right? We being one of many parts of that overall budget. I thought it was important tonight, and I think Superintendent Tracy would say the same, to share with you what the real number is, right? So that you have a sense for if we have to cut down to whatever number we're allotted, you understand the magnitude of the cut that would need to take place.
Would Dr. Tracy care to add anything to that?
Okay, and let me say also that we have, with the teachers union, we are not able to lay off staff, and as we shared with you that the bulk of our budget is in personnel, is in staff and transportation, tuition cost. What 75% or more is in that. There's not a lot left, in terms of funds to spend in a whole lot of other areas. And as we share with you that we're proposing using grants to do some of the mitigation that we have. And I know last year, this group alluded to the fact that we presented a budget with no deep cuts. We're in the pandemic, we're in COVID time. We have spent so much money in upgrading our buildings, thanks to federal support, to make sure that those things happen, or we would have been challenged big time right now, or maybe would not have been able to open up schools because of that. So we are looking for some support. We understand too that the city is struggling, but also will be receiving funding also to help mitigate some of their struggles. So we know that there's a discrepancy of that $1 million, but I'm gonna say, I want this team to do the best you can to support education. I mean, my father once said, you can't make blood out of stone. I like those sayings from my parents. Can't make blood out of stone, but if at all possible, support us in closing our deficit. And eventually, if that is not done, it's coming right back on the Board of Alders at the end of the school year. We would have been presenting to you a deficit of 4-point-something million this year if last year the teachers union had not come in to help us. And that would have been devastating to us to do something like that. But because they have helped us out from last year's problem, we're able to close the school year with over $700 left. That's going back over into the city's coffers. And so we understand the struggles. We're all having struggles on different sides. And as Phil said, we're getting funding, but we cannot put it all on the funding we're getting, or we're going to have a major problem, just like we had with the TIF cliff, when we got that $53 million under school reform.
Mhm. I appreciate your comments, and I was remiss in not at first recognizing the extraordinary efforts that you and your faculty and staff have made to adjust to such a profoundly changed and difficult environment. I'm the father of 2 young children, so I know a little bit about how hard it has been for everybody. So I thank you for that. But boy, we've got some tough challenges to sort through. I want to look next at the capital budget dedicated to the Board of Ed, and the report that we have lists things like custodial equipment, cafeteria program and equipment, information and technology expenditures. And then there are 3 others that I wanted to ask you about. One was general improvements, which was 7.5 million. And I don't know if you need Mike Gormany to help you explain that. I see energy performance enhancements, 1.9 million. And then LT maintenance stewardship. I think that probably means long-term maintenance stewardship. So that brings us back to the question you talked about before, Mr. Penn, about the stewardship of our physical plant, which is, of course, a very important issue. It affects the health and safety of faculty, staff, and students.
Sure.
So I guess I'd like either you or Mr. Gormany to say more about these capital funds and how can we be confident they'll be wisely invested in our physical plant, our school buildings, and the safety and efficiency of those places.
So let me speak to that first, Michael, if you don't mind, and then you can jump in. Thank you for the question, Alder Marchand. The 7.5 million probably reflects the amalgamation of what had been much smaller accounts prior to that, right? So that we have a little bit greater flexibility in how we spend capital going forward. Our capital basically has a roadmap to it in terms of the stewardship report that the Building Stewardship Committee it reviews as part of our Board of Education. It's a document that right now Mr. Barbarata works to maintain and update as we identify new needs. We then slot our capital budget against the items that are identified in there. One of the issues, as you might expect, though, is that if something unusual happens that you don't expect, and particularly if it happens in the second year of the biennial capital cycle, what we found was that previously we didn't have the ability to take money from one fund and move it to another. In other words, those were designated funds that you really had to spend that money on that particular item type. So we're looking for a little bit more flexibility that if we lose a boiler or we lose a chiller unit or something along those lines that we weren't expecting, we have the ability to address that problem fairly quickly. The second issue, you mentioned the energy efficiency fund. We've been using those funds fairly aggressively to upgrade LED lights around the district. We also have a big spend coming up. We have a fuel cell that powers 2 of our schools that is at the end of its life cycle. The estimated cost to replace that is going to be somewhere between $1 million and $1.5 million if that's what we elect to do. So a big piece of the fund that's sitting there right now is reflective of that anticipated spend. And then the long-term capital is building towards a lot of what we anticipate will be future needs. You know, you've probably heard me talk about in other meetings, we have somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.5 billion of invested assets in the infrastructure of the schools. Maintaining that over the long term probably does not get solved strictly out of a annual capital budget or out of an annual operating budget. You needed to be putting your money away on a long-term basis to be able to do the big changes that need an upgrade, so that frankly, you don't wind up with a situation like a Quinnipiac or a West Rock going forward, where it would cost you $6 to $10 million to bring the building back up to the standard it needs to be. So yes, I think the oversight is there, and I think we can match a roadmap to how that capital money gets spent to the actual capital budgets themselves. Michael, anything you wanted to add?
Sure. Michael Gormany, 45 Jefferson Road, Brantford, Connecticut. Actually, I think Mr. Penn said it well. One of the things that we were looking at, even though we were looking at trimming the capital budget to meet a more fiscal need on what we can borrow, we still took the time to sort of try to increase some of the items, as Mr. Penn said, in certain areas in the Board of Education, primarily in general repairs and technology. So what we did when I was working with Mr. Penn during the capital side was look at all those smaller accounts, as he said, and sort of consolidate them into one. And what you'll also see in another section of the budget, just to bring it up, is basically redesignation of smaller accounts that were similar, such as painting and in other areas, and really bringing them into the overall general repairs and improvement account. So what we're trying to do, as Mr. Penn said, is really boost up the general repairs for the school facilities.
Just to add on one more point, Alder Marchand, I mentioned this in my presentation, but it's worth repeating here. I did mention that we expect to award the long-term facility study to one of the firms in the early part of May. That document will also be a roadmap for the district for the next 5 to 10 years in terms of looking at the facility itself, but we're also looking at things like building envelope, the infrastructure of the building, as a way of guiding future capital decisions going forward as well.
On that very point, Mr. Penn, you must be aware, of course, that there's been a lot of energy and thought around reducing our carbon footprint. As a matter of fact, just the other night, last night or Tuesday night, I forget which, Tuesday night, Alder Festa chaired a meeting before the City Services Environmental Policy Committee about electrification. And so I'm wondering if issues of sustainability and resilience and carbon footprint impact are part of the long-term facility study that you're about to award to some entity. And if they're not, could they be?
Absolutely. The answer is absolutely they could be, right? We can ask that question. I had an opportunity to discuss with city staff maybe a month or two ago, is there any other opportunities for things like solar at any of our buildings? And we thought we had probably maxed out on the available solar that we could put up based on, trees and buildings and things of that nature that would block out roofs. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there's things that we can't do going forward in terms of energy efficiency to reduce that footprint. LEDs are kind of the low-hanging fruit, right, of energy efficiency. So one everybody does first because it's the fastest return on your money. But as you start thinking about boilers and boilers that say are 30 or 40 years old, being replaced with new technology now on those boilers, where they're modular in nature. In other words, you effectively have 3 smaller boilers replacing one very large one, and the 3 will click on in sequence depending on what the need of the building is, or click off in turn. It's just a small example of sort of the technology that's being replaced right now versus what was here at probably the time the school was created or soon thereafter. But we will make sure that we talk with the vendors, and we're interviewing them, and I'm glad the timing of this, one is tomorrow and another one is on Monday, to talk about that very issue about energy efficiency and reducing our carbon footprint.
Thank you, Mr. Penn, for that response. And my last request is I'm going to make through the chair, which is that in the past, we've been able to review detailed budgets, including the central administration and all the schools.
Yep.
And I recall I made the request last year, we didn't receive it, but in years past we did. And so I'd like to request that through the chair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So noted. Thank you, Alder Marchand. Alder Ernie Santiago, you are next, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I got so many comments, I don't know where to start. I just want a clarification on that. What is it, Twilight School that I heard?
Yes.
Yeah. What we don't. How's that going to work? I mean,
Doc, you want me to answer?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay. So our high schools typically dismiss at 2:00 in the afternoon. And so we haven't set times yet, but it may run from 2:30 to 7:30. And so a student may take Algebra 2 class either at that 2:30 hour or may come in at 4:30 to pick up that credit. So students would sign up for those credit hours that they would need. And then it will be available to our students in the evening. So it's not that we're running, if you will, another high school, but providing extended opportunities for students to earn credits during the school year. We do it in the summertime, but we're going to do it during the school year as well.
okay, so let me. So a student will be able not to go to school in the morning. So we'll go in the afternoon. Is
it
that
will
what
provide them the opportunity. So we do have some students who we know are working and may not be able
to go in the
attend,
morning?
right? Of course, we're going to encourage all of our students to attend the regular school day. However, if there's a student, there's a hardship, there's an issue, the counselors sit down, the principals sit down. This will be an opportunity for students, but it's not, you can go in the morning or the evening, but for some of those students, they will need that particular option. And then for our students who do attend during the regular school day, they will also be able to pick up a credit or two in the Twilight School as well.
And for those students, will there be transportation too? Or they gotta get to school on their own?
Good question.
Good question. We have not discussed that at this time. Typically, our buses are in session at 2:00 in the afternoon across the district, but we'll look into that to see what we could possibly do.
Or possibly bus passes.
Or bus passes, right.
Okay. And will that increase the amount of money that you will need, or?
Well, we've allocated funds in our ESSER 2 funds to support Twilight School. And we've been talking about it a little bit, almost as a pilot, utilizing ESSER 2 to see, are students really interested? Is this a viable option for our community? So we've invested funds in Twilight Schools, and we'll look at the data afterwards to see if this is something that we should continue after the grant expires. But this was an option that we heard come from our community members, our internal stakeholders, as well as our external stakeholders as well, wanting the idea of a Twilight School. Other districts across the nation run them. We have not in the past. And so this is a way for us to test it out. Mr. Penn talked earlier around the opportunity to change the way we do education in New Haven. And these are one of those programmatic changes that if it works, that we'll try to figure it out in our general funds or through some other grants to continue.
All right, thank you for the answer. I got so many comments, so I just leave it for the deliberations. But thank you. I just wanted to hear something about that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Alder Ernie Santiago. Alder DeCola, questions?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I want to review it more, and I'll talk with leadership about where we have to go on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Alder DeCola. Alder Morrison?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. I just have a question in regards to, that's a lot of money the Board of Ed is getting, but I know it's temporary. You know, Keisha of Miss Bread, I only see your maiden last name. You know, for me, I want to know, is the Board of Ed able to share? Sharing is definitely caring. You got the Boys and Girls Club, you got the, you got LEAP, you got the Q House, you got all these different places where all your children, all our children, all our babies who are in your district come to these programs. And programs cost. And we're not looking, I'm not looking for any kind of monies that's going to be any kind of like permanent program or permanent this, permanent that, because that money does have to be spent by September 2023. But at the same time, while the money is here, these other programs would, that again, help to educate your children in different ways, our children in different ways, will be there. And so I just want to know, what are your plans to go, like the kids say, sharing is caring?
Sharing is caring. Miss Hannah.
Yes.
Alder Marshall, always go sharing with caring. Miss Hannah's.
I will.
Share what we're doing with partners, please.
Yes. So we just, and I'm glad you raised that question. So we just held a meeting with our community agencies that service our youth organizations last week. I believe we had over 60 people on the call. And we opened up our request for qualification process. If you go to our website, it's all about summer programs and after school extended day opportunities. So this provides an opportunities for some of those agencies that you mentioned to apply, tell us about the programming they would like to offer. In particular, will you hold certain seats for New Haven school students? Over the summertime, tell us what the cost is. We're not guaranteeing that we're going to pay for every program throughout the city in the summertime or during the school year, but we want to get an understanding of what the programming is that's out there, and let's see how we can partner together to leverage funds. So we are already on that, meeting with them, but it's a good point. We want to strengthen our community partnerships. We've been talking to some of our health-based organizations as well on how can we strengthen their partnerships within our schools as well. So if you have some ideas, some thoughts around that, you definitely can reach out to one of us and we'll definitely see what we can move forward with it. But it's going to be important, Alder Morrison, it takes a village. And we cannot do this alone. We need everybody involved. Hence why we set up the meeting with our community partners for that reason.
Okay, and that's great to hear. I didn't hear anything about a community partners meeting, so hopefully you guys will have more, and the word is put out there for a variety of people, because we have a lot of nonprofits in the city that do a lot of great things, different things. And I think that the opportunities of these kind of fundings, and we all know Jeanette is with the Q House, but I'm not just talking about the Q House. I'm talking about all these various programs. I think of, they got programs out there, they teach kids basically how to love themselves, with modeling and all this stuff. And so to be able to see some of that money go to help these programs move their needles a little further along would definitely show the village that we all are to our children. And so if you could, let us know again, you said that there's something online for summer programs and after school. I don't know if
Yes.
you can put it in the chat.
I'll put it
and
in
I
the
don't know
chat. I'll
anything
put it in
about
the chat.
Okay, you can put it in and somebody will figure that part out. So, okay, and so we'll get that information. The other thing that I wanted to know is, generally speaking, with this money, one of the things I've been in New Haven outside of college and all that for 53 years, and I'm a product of the New Haven public school system. And the one things that I've learned over the years as being an elected official is that through the Board of Education, we have a tendency to come up with these programs, just like how we all know this money is going to end September 2023. We know that, but we'll come up with a program, 2, 3, 10, get these people, they become a part of our family who's working. And then when the money ends, we try to find a way to keep them on board. Now, I'm all for people keeping their jobs, but what happens so often is that with the Board of Ed, we continue to build on the general fund side with different people in programs, but we don't have the money because that grant on the other side is gone. But because we have these relationships with the individuals, it's hard to say, Ms. Keisha, next year is it, right? So you're going to have to find you a new job or whatever type of challenging or courageous conversation that needs to be had. So I just want to know, what is the exit plan when it comes to the individuals or the groups or whomever that will get these jobs that you outlined in those on those screens? What is that exit plan? I think that's a huge question, because we don't want 4 years from now you guys coming back and saying we need 25 million. You want to say that now, right, Dr. Tracy?
May I answer, Madam Chair? Honorable Jeanette Morrison, it's a good point you raise, and we have been talking about that around sustainability. So what we failed to have said in the beginning, or we mentioned it very quickly, was that those staff members that we put in the grant that we are hiring, it is going to be clear that this is just for the duration of the grant. At the end of the grant, there would be a mass layoff of these people, because we're making that clear up front. We cannot and will not put that on general funds. It cannot happen. Because then the system of New Haven, public school, and the city would be broke. No money at the end of this. And then that would be fiscally irresponsible on my part, even after I retire, to leave the city in a mess like that. That would not make any sense. That would, for the system that I love and hold dear. So we are working to make sure that that does not happen. Everyone who is coming on, whether they're psychologists or social workers or staff members to help out in the interim, that this is a short-term fix.
Fixed duration.
Short-term emergency fix to help us over the tide for the next couple of years. And also, we may be able to pick up some of these also with the 90-something million dollars that we're also getting. So there's a little more long-term piece to some of these things. Now it's going to be difficult getting people who know I'm coming in just for 2 years. But we'll see what risks they're willing to take as we put that out there.
And Dr. Tracy, just to add on to that, as I may, we've talked about making it very clear in the offer letter to the employee that it would be stated in there that they're being hired under a grant, and that the grant is slated to end as of a particular date. So there would be very clear to that employee not to have an expectation beyond that date.
And we have done that already with federal magnet grants. Some of the schools hire magnet resource teachers, and we were very clear. Sorry, the grant is over. If you can find another job at your school or in another school where there's an opening, be our guest. You can apply for those. So we are very conscious about that.
Okay, the one thing that I would recommend, and this is my last statement, is that because 2023 will be here before we can blink our eyes. And every single year, you send those people a reminder, this will end July, whatever, 2023, because I'm telling you, that is one of the reasons why we are in such a mess right now. Because all those years when I was in school, all those people who I thought worked for the Board of Ed, come to find out, as now I'm an adult, I've learned they got these special funds and grants and things of that sort. All those people continued, and which I loved, it was a benefit to me, but they continued to work. And then when the well got dry, the well got real dry. And then, like you said, Dr. Tracy, it falls on the city of New Haven, not just the board, but it falls on the city of New Haven. So that is it, how we're going to share, and you gave me that answer, and that you're going to come up with a very specific exit plan, and making sure that people understand that, you know, they won't be able to stay unless they find another job within the system to work for the Board of Ed. So that's all I have. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Moving along to Alder Walker Myers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so I heard during your presentation that there will be some funds that is kind of like unrestricted. We don't know exactly what we're going to do with them. I think COVID-19 has showed all of us that we have to really think outside the box. And I'm glad you have a grant writer, because after my question, the grant writer is going to come actually into play. My question is, have you guys been thinking about how to tend to the kids that's not going to go to college? Because I know college is really important, but we all know that we have a number of kids in our school system that's not going to go to college. So have you thought about that and thought about any grant funding that we could look at, even if it's temporary, that could really support, you know, kids that's not going to college?
May I answer, Chair?
Go ahead, Dr. Tracy.
So good point, Alder Walker's President Walker Myers. Good to see you. So it's a great point. So there are other grants too. This is not the only one. We are working with the city on a manufacturing grant that we're working on for our students through what is called an earmark. And Mr. Gormany is aware of that. We're working with the city on that one. We are also working on some other funding that is coming through. I asked them not to use the word, but they use it, LEAP, not to be confused with our LEAP program. There's another grant where ACES, as a rec, is going to be the fiduciary for this grant passing through ACES. We were just informed, I don't know if you heard of Governor Lamont talking about that grant to certain of the large school districts, include with New Haven is included. There's another funding source coming through to work with a lot of our disengaged young people. And so that's going to be a big one that we're working with. And it's also going to be a lot of community engagement, engaging community partners in that aspect too. So we know when our vision is not just college, but it's college, career, and life. So we're not everyone is going to want to go to college. I know my brother didn't go, but you couldn't beat him in how he builds a nice house, right? He gained those skills and he can do that. So a lot of our kids will not want to go to college. And we understand that we have to provide for their needs of how they can survive in this society also. And many schools, we have in many of our schools right now what is called the CTE programs, right, Phil? Culinary arts and all these things, where many of our kids really gravitated towards those types of courses to build their skills. And so we are aware that we're not just preparing students for college, that's just one part, but college, career, and life.
Okay, thank you. And my next question is, so like, you know, we hear time and time again that the way we educate our kids now, it's a little different than how we used to a long time ago, but it's still very similar, right? And I know we have to stick to the basics, But I guess I'm wondering, when was the last time that the Board of Ed and the community actually sat down and had a strategic plan around how we educate our kids? When I was in school, there were programs that taught like real life skills, right? I went to Hill House. You had carpentry. Those the skill trades are things that could actually set people on a good pathway. To end up being in the middle class here in this city and beyond. So I guess, yeah, that's my question, but I guess I'm trying to get to, I really think that it's time to start having those kinds of conversations, because I think when we come to the budget, we say, we need this amount of money and it's going to keep us doing exactly what we've been doing. It's, we're not asking for anything more, but it's going to sustain us for what we've been doing. But in some cases, what we've been doing is not working. So I guess having a broader conversation about what educating our kids really look like, what we can do. We have to follow all the guidelines and stuff, of course, but what we can actually do to really get to the core of how we need to educate our kids.
Can I add something to that, Madam Chair?
Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not the chair. I'm sorry. Not my
So
meeting.
within the ESSER 2 funds, we have something that I like to refer to as an innovation fund. And what that's designed to be is dollars that are being set aside for teachers that want to use them, or principals that want to use them. If they have an idea of how to do something differently and they've never had the funding to do it before, this is their opportunity. And what we're going to do is we're going to give them the opportunity to almost apply for a grant within a grant. Come to us and say you need $5,000 to do this, or $10,000 to try this, and we'll see where it goes and become kind of our own incubator of some sort, right? So that if we see an idea that sparks and we get good results, does that become something we adopt on a district-wide basis going forward? And there's a small amount of money, roughly, I want to say $500,000 or so, parked in the ESSER 2 grant for that purpose. And I think the plan is going to be to open it up to a much greater number in the ESSER 3 one. But it's precisely for that purpose. Let's try things differently than what we're doing right now and see where that takes us.
And more frankly, I think New Haven, it's time for New Haven to launch its own technical school for our students. They don't have to go across Hamden border to get there, but have something in New Haven for our students in New Haven. I like what Eric Clemens is doing with his program. Those are some of the things that can be mirrored in a technical school or something. I looked at early President Walker Myers. I look at, we have families. People no one wants to be a seamstress anymore. We have so many of our schools that are uniform schools, and we purchase from these big companies and spend all this money. Can you imagine if we go back and we threw out a home economics program? Because I was part of a middle school where we had home economics and woodworks and all these different pieces. We threw those out. We threw out the programs, we say the baby with the bathwater. And those are things that people could really rely on and make monies for themselves and in the community. Some of those things, although they were in the past, we need to go back and look at them. Everything was not all that bad. And we need to go back and recreate some of those things for our students. I used to see how the students beam when they were able to make a chair. I mean, I have a chair in my house where my son made, and I said, come and take it. They said, no, I keep it there, Mom. But I enjoy seeing him doing that. He learned that skill to make that chair. Carpentry, woodwork, cabinet making. Our kids can make these things and become their own entrepreneurs in the district. And we tend to throw those out and push college. College is important, mark you. I want all my kids to go to college. As a matter of fact, all 7 went to college. So I want this, if students are willing to do that and that's what they want, then that should be provided. But there should also be another avenue if they don't choose to go that way. We need to provide for their needs. And one of the best ways, I always say, is to find out from the students. as adults, we speak for them all the time. We need to find out from our students what makes them tick. What is it they want? And then cater to their needs.
Thank you. And then my last question is, have we thought about how we integrate like financial literacy in all of our schools, really teaching kids how to do budgets and stuff like that, and actually entrepreneurship, because I think that is another avenue that we could go down. I just think it's so many possibilities where we collectively can create a pipeline from schools to real jobs. And I just think that not just New Haven, the state, everywhere, I don't think we actually fully utilize those resources to figure out how to actually get that done.
Right.
But have we thought about that in New Haven to integrate those two programs that I just mentioned?
So in terms of financial literacy from the state level, they're pushing that to start from the middle school years. So we have the math department. I sent the information of what the state is saying we can do. They're also offering a small grant to even do that. So that is something that I know is out there right now that we're looking at. And in some schools that is already being offered.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All righty. Thank you, Alder Walker-Myers. Alder Festa, you're next, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Board of Ed, for your presentation. It answered many of my questions. My colleagues have also asked questions that I had, but of course, I always have more. And on the topic of what President Walker-Myers was saying, there's also computer science and maybe software engineering that and data science, et cetera, that a lot of kids don't know about or might be interested in educating themselves. But besides that, I have questions regarding or a clarification for Mr. Penn. So the Mayor's Together budget is looking for an additional $3 million, but in essence, we really are looking at 7 to 8 million that is needed. Is that correct to say? You're muted.
Mr. Penn? Yeah.
Yes. I had to unmute. Sorry about that. Yeah, the exact number is 8.8. It would be the number that we would be looking for absent anything else.
Okay, and I just want to make a comment that Dr. Tracy asked for our support at the very beginning of the presentation. And I think you all know that everyone on this board supports education. Most of us either have had children go through the system or have children going through the system and want that to continue and in the right direction. So it's not a matter of whether we support education or not. It's just a matter of whether we can afford that $8.8 million. And obviously the city and the state are in dire straits that we all spoke about. With that being said, we're getting this additional funding or this unrestricted funds. Have we thought about using some of those funds for even, you said to think outside the box, but to improve our school fields? We learned that sports is important for the kids to build morale. It gets them outside and moving and off the screens. And with safer fields, we hopefully won't have any liabilities either. So, I mean, it's maybe something, I don't know if it's something that can be done, but maybe something to consider.
Yes.
Because some of our fields are in pretty disarray at the moment and have been. But also, I'm just concerned about some of the outside contracts we have. How many outside contracts do we have? And at what cost, what total cost to the city?
Honestly, I probably couldn't give you a total right now, but I'd be happy to follow up. Just within facilities, our on-call vendors, there's something like 60 contracts that we have right now. When you start adding in what is an outside contract, certainly transportation becomes something that you see. But then do you count anything within special ed, for instance? If we have a student placed at a facility, if we have a contract with that facility, you count that number. You know, I would say all in, it's well over 100 contracts if we really added it all up.
And you don't know the cost.
Off the top of my head now, because it really would depend on how you want to define that. You know, if you defined special ed that you have an agreement with an outside facility for a student, do you define that as a contract or not? Or is it just strictly, do you think about it as tuition? I know our major contracts are our facilities maintenance ones. Those are a total of about $6 million between the two of them. We have a big contract, as you know, with First Student, roughly 24 or 25 million, give or take. And then you start getting down very quickly under $1 million. You know, we have contractual relationship with ACES to provide certain services to us, for instance.
And that's about 18 million or more.
Because a lot of that is special ed driven. That's right.
Mhm.
I guess I would be more interested in the non-educational portion.
Okay.
Well, I'd be happy to compile that and filter that back through the chair for you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you, if we could make that request. Thank you. You know, and I say that because we also have to remember that I think the facilities management company that we do have a contract with, and you mentioned their name earlier, is it Barbarata?
Go-To Services is the company.
Go-To Services, thank you.
Yeah.
You know, they also use our fleet, so they use our cars, et cetera, to do the maintenance at our facilities. So we have to consider that as well as a perk to their contract, because they're not using their own personal vehicles. With that being said, you know, it's a concern to me what happened during COVID and some of the our schools not being ready due to poor management. And how much did that cost us? I mean, it not only cost us money, but it cost us school time for our students, costing their families money. So are we reevaluating how much we're paying them for the amount of hours that they're actually working, and who is in charge of actually changing filters and doing maintenance and making sure that the schools are safe, not only during COVID. COVID was just a way for us to discover some of the concerns that we had and discovered some of these things. So that's costing us additional funding. And now we're looking, I think you may have made a comment a while ago about capital funds need to be higher than what we currently have, but help me understand how this money is spent on a regular, normal, typical school year.
All right, so if I understand, there's basically two questions there. So the question around the management of the facilities, you may be aware 2 weeks ago or so, I had presented to the Board of Education at their request an estimate of costs of what would it take to bring the management of all facilities back in-house versus paying through an outside vendor. And that was presented to them. And there was no decision that was made that night because they're looking for an administration recommendation. And we want to have input from the new chief operating officer into that process before making that recommendation. So it's either you insource it again, or you continue to outsource it, and that's basically your decision, or do you try and find some hybrid in between? But that's an ongoing conversation. As I mentioned, I think earlier, capital decisions get driven off primarily the stewardship reports that are generated each year about what we think the highest priority projects are across the district around our HVAC systems, around LED upgrades, things of that nature, building control systems. And that will determine, by and large, the 2-year roadmap across our biennial capital cycle for the projects we have aligned against those funds. And it then comes down to, of course, going out to RFP for the various services to put those together and actually get the work done. What the roadmap typically doesn't include, and how could it, is the unfortunate breakdown of a system that you didn't anticipate would break down. And then it becomes a question of, do you have funds available to complete that repair? And if you do need to use funds to do that, does it defer a project out to a later period? But that's the typical process that I don't think it's unique to New Haven. I think in my experience, all facilities managers would go through. You have your plan, but then you need to adapt based on what's generated around you in terms of new information.
Thank you for that. I guess the concern is, also who is, and I don't want this to be a long discussion, but who is responsible for each school to make sure that the checklist is checked off, where the filter's checked, ducts clean, blah, blah, blah. All of that, so similar to what you do to your home.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to focus too much on that. I think the point was made that I have a concern about how our schools are maintained, and it needs to be addressed, and it's costing us financially. And we need a safe environment for our students and our staff, our teachers, our administrators, everyone as a whole. I'll move on to, you mentioned the grant writer. They've been here since August. Do you have a total amount of funds that they were able to collect, and in what? And is there a pipeline? I know it's hard to say what grants are out there, but is there a goal, or does the Board of Ed set a goal for an amount for grants?
So she has put together for me on a routine basis, and I've actually asked for one for the May Finance and Operations Committee meeting of the board, what she calls her win-loss report. And it captures all the opportunities on which she's worked and which we submitted an application. And I want to say, as of the last time I looked at it, we were somewhere in the neighborhood of about a $4 million win in the term since she's been here. And in that, we also capture pipeline information, things that we're aware of that we're working on but haven't submitted yet, things that we continue to see out there. It's really a wide array of things that she's working on right now. And to me, one that caught my eye is NOAA. She's working on a grant it's an opportunity through NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric, whatever they're called, basically to do work along the sound with a couple of different high schools and have them do original research in that location funded by NOAA. There's another one that she's working on that I really do think we're going to get that would pay for 10 social workers for the next 5 years. It's a grant worth almost $5 million. So I had expectations when she was hired. I said, boy, it would be great if we can get her to cover, I use the term a multiple of her salaries, because that's typical of what you see for grant writers. She is somewhere at the 40x stage, I want to say, versus her salary at this point. And that's in addition to other work that she's done, helping to put together the routine grants. So, we've utilized her for, I utilized her for ESSER 1. We've utilized her to some extent for ESSER 2. So we didn't have a specific dollar amount in mind, but we said, bigger is better. And, to the extent that you can start getting away from some of these government-sponsored grants and into the private foundations and get into that space, we still think there's a lot of opportunity to be had there.
Well, that's good news. That's great to hear that there's that she's getting a lot of money, additional funds for our school kids, for helping them in all aspects. Yeah. So just lastly, because I think this is
number 4, Alder Festa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned Alliance Fund not being flexible in 4 areas. What are those 4 areas?
It's you can use them for talent, academics, culture, and operations. And so there's a fair amount of stuff that you can put into those four, but it definitely does not cover everything. So we've been fortunate in terms of our ability to find ways to use that grant. As an example, on one of the slides tonight, you would have seen K-5 math texts, and it was crossed out. And the reason it was crossed out is we found an opportunity to use part of this year's Alliance grant and part of this year's Title I grant to pay for those texts now. So it didn't become an operating expense for the future year. But those are the four big areas that you have opportunities to spend in.
So from the sounds of it, they actually sound pretty flexible for not being flexible.
It depends on how well written your grant application is. I guess I would say it that way. But there are things that you absolutely cannot pay for out of those grants as well. And that does put a limitation on us. If we have something that is an expense that has cost increases associated with it, that's not something we can really use Alliance to pay for.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you all for what you're doing for our kids. I have 3 in the system. They're getting a great education, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Alder Festa. Alder Furlow, you're next, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was quite a presentation. I'm going to try not to ramble. I'm like my colleague in Ward 15. There is so much that was presented that I think that we could probably spend the rest of the night asking questions, and probably most of them will be non-budget related. So I will get back to something that I think is important. We have 2 schools that are closing. The result, basically, from what I can see, being in these schools, is due to the to maintenance, to these schools being in bad repair. And so I think it is an important conversation that we focus on what the plan is moving forward that is going to provide better maintenance and repairs of these facilities. And so I don't want to take a lot of time in this meeting to talk about it because maybe you don't have that plan in place. I think through you, Madam Chair, I would like to know what the budget was in the last year, what was spent in maintenance last year, what is projected to be spent this year in maintenance, and whether that is going to be sufficient so that 5 years down the road, we're not looking at closing additional schools because they're crumbling. So that's through you, Madam Chair, if I may. And the other thing that I thought was very interesting, you mentioned the big 3. And so I would like to hear a little more about the student population, student teacher. I just don't think that that's apples to apples. So you don't have to get into a long explanation. Do you think that the big 3 is when you talk about the student ratio, the student teacher ratio, the cost per student to go to these schools, which includes teacher salaries, you know everything that includes, I'm not going to go through it. Sure. Do you think that's apples to apples?
So your question's a good one, right? Because it's you got to peel back the layers of the onion in some cases to really understand what's in their numbers. And to a large degree, that's why I tend to use state data as the litmus test for that, because it really does put everything on an apples to apples basis. What it would take is doing a deep dive into their budget presentations to see what are they doing that's either more or less than what we're doing here in New Haven that drives their per pupil spending. One of the things that I'm aware of, as an example, is that although they have a very similar number of schools and they have a very similar number of students, fewer in fact than what we have here in New Haven, Hartford spends, as you saw, about $2,000 more per student than we do in New Haven. A big portion of that is the fact that Hartford's Alliance / ECS funding is 50 million more than what New Haven receives every year. And I struggled with that initially after coming to New Haven and trying to understand why there was that big a disparity. And a lot of it has to do with wealth measures, believe it or not. And although, you know, New Haven certainly struggles in terms of a poverty level here, it is on a completely different level in Hartford, the way it's been explained to me. That they are literally ranked dead last by a large margin on every wealth measure that you have that goes into those state funding formulas. So, of course, given the opportunity in state funding with $50 million more dollars, I mean, I think we would find a way pretty quickly to find 50 million more, to spend 50 million more a year here in New Haven if we had it. So I think that drives a lot of it. In other words, the funding drives the programmatic activity to some degree in some of those other districts. But I understand the question you're asking, and it would require something of a deep dive into what's their underlying spending and how does that, you know, 22,000 a year break out versus our 20,000, for instance.
I really appreciate your answer, Mr. Penn, and I wish you all the best in your future.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And Madam Chair,
Yes,
may I
ma'am.
say something? I think it was Alder Furlow.
Mhm.
Go back and say with those two schools, I'm not going to get deep into that, but with those two schools, please be reminded that one of them was built in 1965. One was built in 1950, and all those were swing spaces for new schools. West Rock Authors became a swing space for the new Beecher School. The new Beecher School came out of that. Quinnipiac, the Ross Woodward School came out of that. So I just wanted to say that, and then they were brought back into commission because we were trying out with smaller magnet schools with new themes and what have you. So they were brought back into commission. I just wanted to give that background to those two schools that were really physically old buildings.
Thank you, Dr. Tracy. I certainly do appreciate that, though that doesn't exclude the dirtiness and the broken faucets in those schools. It's unacceptable.
No, I'm not saying it excludes that. No.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving right along, next person on our list is Alder Evelyn Rodriguez. Do you have questions for the Board of Education?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The pandemic has forced the New Haven Board of Education to move to the 21st century in regards to education, in regards to online remote learning, and versus classroom face-to-face instruction. So this, to me, is a great big change. We're still addressing the pandemic. You know, many of the things that are happening surrounding the pandemic, the cautions that are being given to us directly through the governor's office and so forth. And several of its variances, the B1427, the B1429, which is 20% more transmissible, and the B117, which is 50% more transferable, are on the rise in our states, throughout all of our states. So looking at remote learning versus classroom learning, and talking to many parents and teachers as to this change that's happening in our school system, additionally seeing that many of our children that are learning and they like the remote learning, but we have children that are struggling with the remote learning, and we have a lot of service providers in our community that are helping our students in different ways through tutoring, bringing them together in smaller groups throughout their school week. Looking at all of these things, and I know it's a difficult way that I'm trying to bring this question to you. I know that the budget needs to look a bit different than it would normally look had we not had to deal with the pandemic had we not had to be moved into the 21st century, because the fact remains that electronics, and if you look at throughout our entire state, you hear all of our school systems talking about how this is good in so many ways and how this may not be the best thing for our children face to face and interactions and the things that we really need for them to experience in terms of building their lives. The primary question here is that, taking into account all of this, does your current budget take into account the changes that have to be made from here forth in terms of budget, and specifically in reference to the health component of the Board of Education? That's the main question here. And also, is there a committee of finance that is looking at, in the long run, what's going to happen with New Haven Board of Education and the world of electronics as we move into it, and its advantages and its disadvantages with our limited English community students and so forth? Thank you.
Tracy, why don't I try to take part of that, and then you can kind of
Okay.
chime in addition. I guess in terms of thinking about the budget, our budget predominantly does not reflect COVID times. And the reason it does not is because we have all the additional COVID grants that we talked about tonight that are available to us to address those needs. There was a lot of electronics in ESSER 1. There was a lot of PPE in ESSER 1. Facilities changes, air filters, which I know have been a hot topic, for instance. There's technology and all those other things buried into ESSER 2, and I suspect into ESSER 3. And we've used the Coronavirus Relief Fund as a big part of that going forward too. I guess at some point, I'd like to think this pandemic will end. And I can see for us having at least 2 more years of funding available to us to address the specific needs of operating in a pandemic without being in the core, if you wanted to define it that way, the core budget that we have for operating the schools in non-pandemic times. And in terms of the oversight to that going forward, there is as you know, a finance and operations subcommittee of the Board of Education that deals with all of the finances that we put together, that deals with all of the capital requests that come out of our budgetary processes, that look at when we submit a grant, what's called a grant abstract. It gives a complete breakdown of everything that we intend to buy out of that grant. So I think to a large degree that oversight already exists in that committee. And of course, that committee then makes recommendations onto the full board for an up-down vote on what's been proposed to them. Dr. Tracy, anything else you want to add to that?
I just want to say, we are very much aware of the needs of our students, the needs of our special education learners, the needs of our English learners, and how challenging, and other struggling learners, disengaged youth, and how it's been a lot of struggle for our families and for our students. We have gone out to invest in, for English learners, Imagine Learning, and that's not a part of this budget. We use, as Mr. Penn says, some of the ESSER funds to do that, getting licenses for Imagine Learning that can address the needs of our students in English and in Spanish, to make sure that there's a way of reaching these students. Is it enough? No, it is not enough, and we know that. It is not. It is difficult for a lot of our learners to learn remotely. They need that physicality, that, what would I say, this connection to their teachers face to face. When you're teaching language, they need to see your mouth moving. They need to hear the intonation. They need to hear the rising, falling inflections. They need all of those are necessary, which is not best presented through a computer program. And even in school, if the teacher is going to be in a mask, it's hard to do that. So we know that the pandemic has created even a greater divide for a lot of our students, and we're making sure that we are putting some of these grants in place to ensure that our students are properly served. So we're working on those things. All of our students, all of them, but for some population, struggling learners, special education, English learners, they struggle more than anyone else, and we're aware of that. We're shoring up some of the grant monies to make sure we're investing in their needs and how to support them. Because if these students that the state consider to be subgroups, if they're not making it, the whole system will be down. So we better make sure that we do our best to make sure that their needs are taken care of. And so we invest in a lot of tutoring. We invest in homework hotline. I'm sure last time Gemma Joseph Lumpkin was with a part of this group, sharing some of the things they're doing, reaching out. We have another group of homeless students that we have to make sure that we address their needs. So it's a big and complicated process in a very complex system of things. And we're trying our best to make sure we reach all the groups that we need to reach, and that they're not shut out of all this funding that we're getting. We're taking care of their needs.
For example, as our older Majority Leader Furlow indicated about the student ratio, let's look at that for a moment. On face-to-face, you have how many teachers to X amount of students in a classroom, whereas a one-to-one student, one teacher to one student, whereas in online, you would have a group for one teacher in giving the online. Nonetheless, it's a different setting. It's not the teacher in the classroom would need a lot more than the teacher online. And I know there are a lot of dynamics and things like that, but the important thing here is that it is a bit different. While maybe the teacher online may be able to utilize a lot of much more creative tools to be able to teach the students in online. So there's a lot of great stuff about everything, and it can be costly, but nonetheless, the cost of one-to-one face-to-face can be more costly than online. So these are things, of course, that in the long run, our school system will eventually explore. On my Alder Morrison, the pro temp of the Board of Alders, talked about if the school system is somewhat friendly to our service providers during the pandemic. And as
Alder Rodriguez,
I'm getting to the question. I'm getting to the question.
Please
During
do.
the pandemic, we had students that went out and received services from service providers, non-for-profit organizations. Can these organizations reach out to the New Haven Board of Education to receive some supports and some fundings through the grants that they receive regarding COVID? Thank you. That is my question, and that is my last question.
So as Ms. Hannon shared with everyone recently, that we're working, part of the work we're doing is with community organizations to make sure we're reaching our students. It's not like we have a lot of monies that's out there flowing for everybody. Everyone has to present something to show what it is they're doing on behalf of the students, and not everyone will be accepted into whatever we have. We don't have, people may think it's a lot of funding. It's gonna go up, it's gonna go away shortly. And so we're trying to make sure we work as closely as we can with community foundations, many who have been working with us for years in other programmatic sections of our school community that we're reaching out to and doing the best we can to bring people into the fold to service our students. Because I believe, like Ms. Morrison, it takes a village to raise our children. But you still don't want everyone in your village. You have to be careful who comes into your village to raise your children. So we have to go through a system of making sure that where people are actually addressing the needs of the students as we see it in our system. Again,
Thank you.
it is
Thank you.
difficult for our teachers to teach both groups. I don't know if you have, I don't think you have seen teachers in the classroom trying to work with the kids in the classroom, work with the kids online. I don't think we understand the magnitude of that and the difficulty of that to get our students focused doing those two at the same time. And there's no funding to have one group doing online and one group doing in person. It's a very difficult process. But we're trying to make do with what we have. No one have thought, we would not have thought that we would be at this place at this time.
Moving on to our next person, who is Alder Ron Hurt.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and so much has been said tonight, and thank you for the presentation to the Board of Education. My questions have been answered, and thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Alder Hurt. Alder Decker, do you have questions for the Board of Education?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My head is honestly swimming a bit from all that. I'm going to need a little more time with the book, but I don't have any questions at this time. Thank you.
All righty. Let me say to everyone, the presenters from the Board of Education, that was a lot of information to take in and digest. I kind of scanned briefly the presentation this earlier today that was sent. Yeah. Thank you for the hard work. Please take care of our kids. You know, it's a partnership, so let's work together, right, to educate our children. And thank you all very much. All the questions that were put out by colleagues, I hope we can get follow-up answers to those questions through possibly Mr. Gormany and or our team, Mr. Lucas, and our analyst, Mr. Don Hayden, right? So we thank you, everyone from the Board of Education for being here this evening. Also to the Special Services District, if they're still on the line, I doubt it. I would like to just give a few brief general announcements to let everyone know that our next meeting will be on May 10th. That will be the last opportunity for the public to speak or give any public testimony regarding this proposed budget. And at that time, we will also hold our regular monthly meeting and possibly start our deliberations, right? So as I said before, May 10th will be the next Finance Committee meeting and public hearing. Then on May 13th, we'll continue our deliberations, and if need be, we will hold a final deliberations meeting on May 20th. Right? So until that time, thank you to colleagues that have joined us, committee. God
Madam
bless you
Chair.
all, because it's been a process. Does
Madam
anyone
Chair,
have anything else to say?
this is Alder Adam Marshawn. I move we adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion as to adjourning?
No.
All right, Alder Marshawn, are you in favor of adjourning?
Yes.
Alder Ernie Santiago?
See.
Alder Nicola?
Yes.
Morrison?
Yes.
Walker Myers?
Yes.
Esther?
Yes.
Furlow?
Yes.
Evelyn Rodriguez?
Yes.
Ron Hurt?
Yes.
And Charles Decker?
Yes.
All right, hearing from everyone. Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned for this evening, and thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Be safe.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.